The story begins in New York City, where Gulliver works as a mailroom clerk for a newspaper. One day, he is assigned to interview several candidates in order to hire an assistant who can help him with the department's daily tasks. After reviewing all the applicants, he ends up hiring a young man named Dan that same day. Gulliver shows his new coworker how the job works and makes one thing very clear. They are only mailroom employees and should never draw attention to themselves. However, Dan completely ignores that advice and immediately starts talking directly to the company's executives, including Darcy, the newspaper's editor and the woman Gulliver has secretly been in love with for years. Thanks to his hardworking attitude and the positive impression he makes on everyone in the office, Dan receives an incredibly fast promotion and becomes the head of the mailroom that very same day. The news leaves Gulliver feeling discouraged. After all, his new assistant has surpassed everything he managed to achieve in years of work, and he did it in just a few hours. At the end of the day, Gulliver begins to think that he needs to change his approach to life. He realizes that if he continues acting lazy and unmotivated, he will never get anywhere. Then he notices that Darcy is still in the office and decides to take the opportunity to talk to her about his feelings. However, when he finally stands face to face with her, his nerves completely take over. Unable to tell her how he really feels, he grabs an application form to apply for the newspaper's travel writer position instead. Darcy is surprised to see him interested in the job since she did not even know that Gulliver wrote articles. Excited, she tells him that she looks forward to reading some of his work very soon. Now trapped by his own lie, Gulliver promises that he will show her an article the following day based on a trip he supposedly took to Mexico years ago. The problem is that he has never traveled anywhere and has no idea how to write that kind of report. Desperate, he copies information from several articles he finds online and presents it as his own work. To his surprise, the plan works. The next day, Darcy is impressed by the article and assures him that the travel writer position is his. On top of that, she immediately assigns him his first mission, to investigate and write a story about the mysterious Bermuda Triangle. Darcy explains that she would have loved to do the report herself, but she suffers from motion sickness and would not be able to handle the trip. With no time to argue, Gulliver accepts the assignment and sets off on his new adventure. During the journey, a tour guide explains that all the frightening stories surrounding the Bermuda Triangle are nothing more than exaggerated tales created to attract tourists. After hearing that, Gulliver begins to think that the trip will be much more boring than he expected. Once out at sea, he finds nothing interesting to report. Everything seems calm, so he settles down with a magazine and eventually falls asleep. Sometime later, however, he wakes up in the middle of a violent electrical storm. The navigation systems on his boat stop working and his cell phone loses all signal. Trying to stay safe, he searches for a few life buoys, but at that moment, a gigantic whirlpool suddenly appears out of nowhere. The force of the phenomenon is so powerful that it sends the boat flying through the air. After surviving the terrifying ordeal, Gulliver wakes up on a small beach. At first, he feels relieved to be alive, but he soon notices something very strange. There are people standing around him and watching him, yet every one of them is tiny compared to him. Convinced that he must be dreaming, he gets to his feet and easily snaps the ropes that the tiny inhabitants had used to restrain him. The little men, however, refuse to give up. A group of them throws several grappling hooks and manages to bring him crashing to the ground. The impact is so strong that Gulliver loses consciousness. When Gulliver opens his eyes again, he discovers that he is being transported by the tiny inhabitant as they move through the streets of a strange and unfamiliar town. The entire kingdom of Lilliput is amazed by the enormous giant they have captured. Shortly afterward, General Edward presents the gigantic creature to King Theodore, the ruler of the kingdom. Still unable to understand what is happening, Gulliver is taken to a prison where he meets Horatio. The man had been imprisoned simply for looking at Princess Mary, the king's daughter. Before the giant's arrival, Horatio had also been considered the tallest man in all of Lilliput. Over time, the two develop a friendship as they share their situation as prisoners. However, the peace does not last long. General Edward begins using Gulliver as a tool to perform heavy labor for the benefit of the kingdom. To control him, he installs a massive mechanism on the giant's body that operates through a series of levers, allowing him to direct Gulliver's movements as if he were a machine. Meanwhile, the Blefuscudians, Lilliput's greatest enemies, set a plan in motion to attack the kingdom. Several infiltrators start fires throughout different parts of the city as a distraction, while another group attempts to kidnap Princess Mary. As soon as he hears the alarm, Edward realizes that the kingdom is under attack and immediately orders Gulliver to carry him to the royal palace. When they arrive, Edward commands the giant not to interfere with the rescue of the princess. However, Horatio begs him to help her. Gulliver decides to listen to his friend and, without much effort, manages to save Mary from her captors. At the same time, King Theodore becomes trapped by the flames. Gulliver tries to rescue him, but the fire is too intense even for him to handle. Then he comes up with an unusual idea, putting out the fire by urinating on the flames. To everyone's surprise, the plan works and the king survives. Edward considers the act a tremendous insult to the crown and insists that the giant should be executed. However, Theodore is grateful for being saved and begins to see Gulliver in a different light. From that moment on, the relationship between the giant and the people of Lilliput starts to improve. The following day, Gulliver receives an invitation to attend a royal dinner. However, he agrees on one condition: Horatio must also be invited. Although the king hesitates at first, he eventually accepts. During the banquet, the nobles become curious about the giant's origins and ask whether he is the king of his homeland. Gulliver decides to exaggerate the truth and claims that he is actually the president of his country and that he is in charge of everything. The people of Lilliput are deeply impressed, imagining that he comes from the most powerful empire in the world. Even so, Gulliver explains that he needs to return home and that, in order to do so, he must find his boat. Theodore promises to send his men to search for it, and if it cannot be found, he will order the construction of a vessel capable of taking Gulliver back home. As the days pass, Gulliver practically becomes a celebrity throughout the kingdom. The people of Lilliput built him an enormous mansion designed specifically for his size, demonstrating their extraordinary skills as builders. They even create an entertainment hall where the giant shares stories about his supposed life. However, many of those stories are completely made up. Gulliver casts himself as the main hero in several famous movies, claiming that he was the one who lived through those incredible adventures. He even says that he took part in events such as those from Star Wars and Titanic. At one point, he claims that he died during the sinking of the famous ship, but came back to life a few days later. While enjoying his newfound fame, Gulliver also tries to help Horatio win Princess Mary's heart. He gives him advice, teaches him how to behave, and even helps him perform a romantic song to impress her. Despite all of his efforts, however, the princess remains under the influence and control of the ambitious General Edward. That night, Gulliver receives some great news. The army of Lilliput has finally found his boat. However, the vessel was badly damaged during the storm and requires urgent repairs before it can sail again. While inspecting the wreckage, Gulliver also finds his cell phone. To his surprise, it still has some battery life left. When he checks his voicemail, he discovers several messages from Darcy. The editor has already learned that the article he submitted was copied from another newspaper. She is furious about the deception and deeply disappointed in him. In her final message, she makes it clear that she never wants to see him again and that she will personally write the report about the Bermuda Triangle. Darcy's words hit Gulliver hard. Later, he talks with Princess Mary and begins seriously considering the idea of never returning home. In Lilliput, everyone respects him, admires him, and sees him as a hero. Besides, if Darcy wants nothing more to do with him, he feels that he has lost the main reason that inspired him to embark on the journey in the first place. The next day, General Edward tries to convince King Theodore that the giant should leave the kingdom as soon as possible. According to him, Gulliver's presence will eventually bring trouble to the entire population. However, Theodore thinks exactly the opposite. He believes that Gulliver has done nothing but help the kingdom since his arrival. Realizing Edward's true intentions, the king makes an unexpected decision. He appoints Gulliver as the new general of the army and demotes Edward to the position of vice commander. Humiliated and filled with resentment, Edward decides to take revenge. In secret, he disables all of Lilliput's defense systems, leaving the kingdom completely vulnerable to enemy attacks. Watchtowers, cannons, and other defensive weapons are hidden beneath the sea so that no one can use them. Not long afterward, Gulliver is called upon once again to defend the kingdom from an invasion. The giant steps into the water and heads toward the enemy fleet. Hoping to avoid a war, he offers them a chance to retreat and leave peacefully. The Blefuscudians refuse his offer and respond by firing a barrage of cannonballs at him. To everyone's surprise, the attack barely affects him. Many of the cannonballs bounce off his body and fly back toward the enemy ships, causing chaos and destruction throughout the fleet. In the end, Lilliput achieves a crushing victory, and the entire kingdom celebrates the triumph. However, the success begins to change Gulliver. After the battle, he starts feeling invincible and allows fame and power to go to his head. As proof of his victory, he transports all of the enemy ships back to Allied territory and turns the Blefuscudians into prisoners. With the conflict seemingly over, the days pass and the kingdom enters a period of peace and prosperity. Gulliver's influence continues to grow, and even the architecture and customs of Lilliput begin to change according to many of his ideas. During one of these peaceful days, Gulliver talks with Horatio and insists that he should finally confess his feelings to Princess Mary. He explains that she seems to be under pressure to grow closer to Edward and warns him that if he does not act soon, he will be trapped forever in the dreaded friend zone. Encouraged by the advice, Horatio decides to gather the courage needed to win the princess's heart. Meanwhile, Edward continues preparing his revenge. Feeling betrayed by his own people, he travels to meet with the king of Blefuscu and proposes an alliance. Together, they come up with a plan to get rid of Gulliver once and for all. Their idea is to build a gigantic war machine, so powerful that not even the strength of the enormous traveler will be able to stop it. Round that time, Lilliput celebrates a grand festival filled with food, music, and entertainment. Everything seems to be going perfectly, and the population enjoys a period of happiness unlike anything they have ever experienced before. However, the celebration comes to an abrupt halt when an emergency signal warns everyone that a new enemy is approaching. When the emergency alarm interrupts the festival, Gulliver asks all the citizens of Lilliput to remain calm. He assures them that he will solve the problem once again. Shortly afterward, Edward appears piloting a small robot and publicly challenges the giant to a fight. Gulliver accepts without much concern, convinced that he will defeat him easily. However, the situation changes when Edward activates his invention's combat mode. The small robot transforms into a gigantic war machine, even taller than Gulliver himself. The traveler tries to push it, but he cannot move it even an inch. Taking advantage of his superiority, Edward controls the machine and lifts Gulliver into the air by his underwear, humiliating him in front of the entire kingdom. Despite this, the people of Lilliput continue to support him and begin cheering him on. At that moment, Gulliver decides to tell the truth. He confesses that the incredible stories he told about his life never actually happened and that they were nothing more than fabrications. After admitting his lies, he accepts defeat and surrenders. With Gulliver out of the fight, Lilliput falls under the control of its enemies. The giant is tied to a ship and sent to a mysterious island feared by everyone. No one knows exactly what exists there, but the stories surrounding the place are enough to keep anyone away. As soon as he arrives on the island, Gulliver is captured. Meanwhile, Horatio decides to rescue his friend. Before leaving, he explains to Princess Mary that he has found a way to help Gulliver and sets out on his own. During the journey, he discovers that the Blefuscudians have also captured another giant-sized person. It is Darcy, the newspaper editor. The woman is completely confused and believes she might be dreaming. The last thing she remembers is getting caught in a storm while investigating the Bermuda Triangle. Meanwhile, Gulliver discovers who is holding him captive. It is a giant young girl who lives alone on the island. She treats him like a doll, locks him inside a toy house, and spends her time playing with him. She even warns him that she will get rid of him if he tries to escape. When Horatio finally arrives on the island, he manages to sneak into the girl's house and reunite with his friend. There, he reminds Gulliver that the entire kingdom needs his help and that, even though the stories he told were fake, that does not change the fact that he defended Lilliput when it needed him most. He also reveals that Darcy is on the island. Upon hearing this, Gulliver regains his determination. He decides to return to help the kingdom and rescue the woman he loves. While searching for a way to escape, he discovers evidence that other humans had reached the island before him, although none of them managed to survive. Eventually, he finds the parachute of a long-lost pilot and uses it to escape together with Horatio. Not long afterward, Gulliver reunites with Darcy. He explains the truth about the stolen article, apologizes for disappointing her, and admits that he has always been in love with her. Darcy finally understands the feelings of her coworker. Back in Lilliput, Gulliver also frees King Theodore and asks for one more chance to protect the kingdom. The king decides to trust him again and once more appoints him as the kingdom's guardian. The following day, the time comes for the final battle. Gulliver faces the gigantic robot controlled by Edward. Before the fight begins, he promises that if he wins, he will put an end to the war between the two nations forever. Edward, on the other hand, declares that if he wins, he will destroy Lilliput and become its new king. The battle begins and quickly turns into an epic confrontation. At first, Gulliver manages to hold his own without too much difficulty, but Edward soon reveals a secret upgrade hidden within his machine. The former general has installed a powerful electrical generator capable of unleashing devastating blasts against any opponent. One of those blasts strikes Gulliver directly, leaving him immobilized on the ground. Seeing his friend in danger, Horatio mounts a horse and rides toward the battlefield. Horatio manages to infiltrate the machine and eventually comes face to face with Edward. While Gulliver continues to endure the robot's attacks, Horatio seizes an opportunity to destroy the electrical generator, eliminating his enemy's greatest advantage. With the generator destroyed, Gulliver launches another attack. He damages the massive machine and begins striking it with a gigantic steel statue. Finally, one powerful blow is enough to destroy the robot and bring the battle to an end. All of Lilliput celebrates the long-awaited victory. Horatio finally earns King Theodore's approval and wins Princess Mary's heart. At last, the two can be together and live the life they have always dreamed of. However, the celebration is interrupted by Edward. The former general suddenly appears among the crowd and attempts to capture the princess one last time. His plan quickly fails when Mary knocks him unconscious with a powerful punch to the face. With the threat defeated, Gulliver meets with the King of Blefuscu and the King of Lilliput. He explains that wars and conflicts bring nothing but loss and suffering. After listening to his words, both rulers agree to end the rivalry that had divided their peoples for generations. From that day forward, the two nations leave their differences behind and begin living together peacefully as one united community. Gulliver also takes the opportunity to apologize to Darcy for all the lies he told her and for the trouble his deception caused. This time, he chooses to be completely honest with her. Sometime later, Gulliver and Darcy begin their journey back home. During the voyage, they once again encounter the enormous whirlpool that carried them into that mysterious world and manage to return to New York City. Back home, Gulliver discovers a new passion for his work and begins his career as a travel writer. Together with Darcy, he travels to different parts of the world, experiencing incredible adventures and writing new stories along the way. Don't forget to like and subscribe and let me know what you think about this movie.